In exploring the topic of signs from the Bible, it's crucial to first define what is meant by biblical signs. Signs in the biblical context refer to miraculous events, symbols, or phenomena that indicate the presence or will of God, often directing or manifesting a deeper spiritual truth. They are used throughout Scripture as divine cues, imparting guidance, assurance, or warning to believers. The significance of these signs is deeply rooted in their role as tangible expressions of divine intervention, providing clarity and direction amidst the uncertainties of faith. The importance of this concept is immense, as biblical signs are central to the narrative structure and theology of the Bible. They serve as key turning points in biblical stories, revealing God's power and affirming the faith of God's followers. For instance, the parting of the Red Sea in Exodus 14 serves as a monumental sign of God's deliverance and power to the Israelites, a pivotal moment that reaffirms the covenantal promises to his people. In the New Testament, the Star of Bethlehem, as described in Matthew 2:2, guides the Magi to the birthplace of Jesus, signifying divine presence and the fulfillment of messianic prophecy. These examples demonstrate the real-world application of the biblical sign concept, showing how such signs undergird the faith and history of entire communities, shaping cultural and religious identity even today. For many believers, biblical signs have a profound pastoral role, serving as reminders that divine guidance is available, which instills hope and encouragement in personal and communal faith journeys. However, the concept of biblical signs is not without its challenges and controversies. Critics argue over the interpretation and literalness of these signs, suggesting alternative viewpoints where these events are considered metaphorical rather than historical. This raises questions about the nature of divine interaction with the world. Furthermore, individuals may differ in what they perceive as a sign, leading to subjective interpretations that can both deepen or mislead personal faith experiences. Despite diverse perspectives, the concept of biblical signs is intricately connected to notions of prophecy, revelation, and faith within the broader biblical narrative. These signs act as threads linking different parts of Scripture, enhancing the understanding of biblical themes such as covenant, salvation, and divine omnipotence. Recognizing these connections reinforces why signs remain an enduring and influential aspect of biblical scholarship and belief today. When discussing signs from the Bible, it's important to first understand that these signs are often seen as divine indicators or messages that reveal God's will or purpose. Biblically, signs serve as beacons of divine intervention or forewarning, serving to guide human actions, provide reassurance, or authenticate prophetic messages. They are significant because they underscore the belief in an active, communicating deity who interacts with the world in meaningful ways, offering messages either of hope, instruction, or warning. This concept is deeply embedded in Judeo-Christian thought, shaping the ways believers interpret events in their lives and in the world. Numerous biblical passages emphasize the importance of signs. For instance, the book of Exodus features God giving Moses signs to prove his support, like turning a staff into a snake. In the New Testament, Matthew 24:3-8 speaks of signs of the end times, including natural disasters and wars, alerting believers to future divine plans or the second coming of Christ. These examples illustrate how signs provide both guidance and a test of faith, prompting believers to remain vigilant and faithful. In contemporary settings, some individuals perceive natural events or personal experiences as signs. For example, a person might witness a rainbow during a difficult time and interpret it as a sign of hope, echoing God's promise to Noah in Genesis. Alternatively, some believers see global events such as escalating conflicts or environmental changes as signs of the prophesied end times, compelling them to cling closer to their faith and moral principles. However, the interpretation of biblical signs is not without controversy. Skeptics often argue that what religious individuals regard as signs can often be explained by science or coincidence. There's also debate within religious communities about certain interpretations, leading to divergent opinions on what qualifies as a true sign from God versus mere chance or natural phenomena. The concept of signs from the Bible interconnects with broader theological themes like faith, prophecy, and divine omnipotence. It emphasizes the necessity of discernment in spiritual matters and challenges believers to deepen their understanding of Scripture. This pursuit can unify communities around shared interpretations or foster dialogue and debate, reflecting diverse perspectives within the faith. Ultimately, biblical signs are integral to religious experience, acting as catalysts for spiritual engagement and reinforcing the narrative of a dynamic relationship between the divine and human realms. Signs and wonders in the Old Testament are remarkable events or acts that serve as divine interventions by God. These phenomena serve as tangible manifestations of God's power, presence, and purpose within the biblical narrative. Often surpassing natural explanations, signs and wonders are meant to captivate faith, instill awe, and guide the Israelites through divine experiences. They act as reminders of God's covenant and as a means of validating the messages delivered by prophets. Their significance lies not just in their supernatural nature, but in their connection to the broader theme of God's active involvement in the world and his continual communication with humanity. One of the quintessential examples of signs and wonders in the Old Testament is the parting of the Red Sea, Exodus 14:21-22. This miraculous event demonstrated God's deliverance, powerfully liberating the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. The Red Sea crossing reassured the Israelites of God's presence and protection, reinforcing their faith even amidst dire circumstances. Another prominent example is the prophet Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, 1 Kings 18:20-39. Here, God sends fire from heaven to consume Elijah's offering, illustrating his supremacy over other deities and solidifying Elijah's prophetic role. Such events underscore the central role signs and wonders play in demonstrating divine authority and fidelity. There are opinions supporting the idea that signs and wonders serve as essential tools for nurturing faith and trust in God's promises. They are seen as affirmations of divine omnipotence and as a means for the faithful to witness God's intervention in real time. However, challenges and controversies arise regarding the literal interpretation of these events. Some scholars propose allegorical or symbolic interpretations, suggesting these stories convey moral or spiritual truths rather than historical facts. Additionally, skeptics argue that such miracles are scientifically inexplicable, challenging their authenticity within a historical context. Despite differing viewpoints, these signs and wonders profoundly connect to the broader biblical theme of covenant. They authenticate divine commitments and frame the Israelites' understanding of God's expectations and promises. Moreover, they set a precedent that reverberates into the New Testament, where miracles similarly attest to divine authority. For believers, the Old Testament wonders are foundational, shaping the narrative of God's unwavering involvement in human history and guiding subsequent interpretations of biblical signs in modern faith practices. Through these elements, signs and wonders weave into the expansive tapestry of biblical signs, illustrating the persistent and dynamic nature of divine interaction with humanity. The concept of signs from the Bible refers to the various symbols, events, or phenomena described in the Bible that are believed to convey messages or divine guidance to humanity. Signs, in a biblical context, often serve as indicators of God's presence, intentions, or forthcoming events. They are seen as tools used by God to communicate with people, providing reassurance, guidance, warnings, or evidence of his divine power. The significance of this concept in relation to the central theme of biblical signs lies in its role as a bridge between the divine and the human, an intersection where the temporal and the eternal meet. Signs from the Bible remind believers of God's ongoing involvement in the world, affirming their faith and offering guidance in times of uncertainty. A pertinent example is the rainbow seen in Genesis 9:13-17, designated as a sign of God's covenant with Noah, promising never again to destroy the earth with a flood. Another instance is the Star of Bethlehem described in Matthew 2:1-12, which led the Magi to the birthplace of Jesus, symbolizing the manifestation of divine intervention in the birth of the Messiah. Support for this idea is widespread among believers who see signs as affirmations of their faith and feel strengthened in their spiritual journey by what they perceive to be divine communication. Some scholars and theologians argue that signs, as recorded in the Bible, offer timeless wisdom and lessons, providing moral and spiritual guidance across generations. However, challenges and controversies often arise when interpreting these signs. Skeptics might argue that such signs are coincidences or have rational explanations. The subjective nature of interpreting signs also means that individuals may see different meanings in the same event, which can lead to differing beliefs and doctrines within religious communities. Alternative viewpoints also include the caution against relying too heavily on signs, where emphasis should be placed on faith and scriptural teaching rather than solely on physical manifestations. The concept of biblical signs intersects with other biblical themes, such as prophecy, miracles, and the fulfillment of God's promises. Understanding signs helps untangle the complex web of scriptural narrative and prophecy, acting as a key to interpreting biblical text and its relevance to contemporary life. In essence, signs from the Bible illuminate the path for believers, linking the visible world with spiritual truths and encouraging faith, reflection, and action in accordance with divine will.